no substantial change to these four areas.
One change has occurred. You know Anish Chopra. He came out with a press release last week, and he said, folks, if you want to know where your tax dollars are going, go to www.whitehouse.gov/tax receipt. You let them know what your income level is, or you may have to put in what your tax bracket is and what the amount of income you make, and it'll tell you where your money's being spent. I just had one run for someone who, say, makes about $80,000. 71% plus goes into only three things: defense, medical, as well as Social Security. 71%. That is tremendous amount. So defense needs to be cut, and entitlement programs, which constitute almost 50%, they need to be cut too.
Speaking of defense, let me share some interesting numbers here with you, because I was surprised by some of this. The U.S., as you might imagine, has the highest percentage of its GDP devoted to defense versus other countries. So, for example, the U.S. sits with its $687 billion, which is up 81% from 2001. So we've actually spent more on defense in the last decade. It's up to 4.7%, up from 3.1% in 2001. In comparison, here are these other countries and what they spend on their budgets. Brazil spends 1.6% of its GDP on defense. The UK, 2.7%, France, 2.5%, India, 2.8%, China, 2.2%, Australia, 1.9%. Now, Russia is the closest one to us at 4.3%, which doesn't really surprise us from back in the Cold War days.
Because we take care of many of these countries with our defense budget.
That's right, that's right. The only countries here that are spending more than the U.S. are in the Middle East. Saudi Arabia spends 11.2% of its GDP, but think about where it's located.
They got to protect their oil.
They have to protect their oil. So if you think about how rich these countries are in proportion to what they're spending out on their defense budgets, the U.S. spends proportionally much more, and clearly that defense spending, we have to look at it again to figure out whether or not it's something we can sustain in the long term.
What do you think of Donald Trump? He seems to be like torn on the side of President Obama with his birther title, which is he's looking for his birth certificate, the original birth certificate, and wants to know which hospital he was born.
You know, I think Americans are tired of that whole argument. It's going to come back up in 2012, and I hope they kibosh it quickly, because who cares? The man has been in his office, in his seat for 4 years. He's clearly trying to make some good happen. He's got challenges, and in some cases you can argue he may not be as effective as he should be, but that doesn't mean you go back and question the man's beginnings. I think we're over that. It's passé. Donald Trump just wants sensationalism. He is a sensational kind of guy. And of course, now that he is kind of wavering whether or not he's going to throw his hat in the ring, people are paying attention to him. You know what he reminds me of?
Ross Perot.
That's, yes, Ross Perot. If you were watching the elections back in 1992, and I was a lot younger, so I didn't understand the political landscapes the way I do now. But Ross Perot, the only reason he was successful is because he was plain-spoken. He didn't come across as a polished politician. And he spoke some truths as far as our budget situation. He was always about bringing down our debt and our budget. And he resonated with people. He was probably the most viable third-party candidate we've had.
And because of him is when President Clinton decided he's going to raise the taxes and keep the spending in check. I mean, he almost became a Republican. But one of the things, the most predictive of them all, was, you remember, he says, the swoosh that you hear will be all the jobs going to Mexico. You know, that happened to be true, that NAFTA thing. Yeah. But you know what? The Republicans and the Democrats both are into this global situation. They have signed a lot more agreements than just NAFTA since then. Yeah.
Well, I think what Donald Trump has going for him is that he is an all-American. You know, he looks like the guy that was the kid next door, who made it big in his life, was successful, self-made, and he has got a whole lot of money that he can put into this election cycle should he decide to run.
He's got education too, though.
He does, and he made a very interesting comment, you know, recently.
Graduate of Wharton.
He said, we have a president who may not have been born in this country, but I'm a really smart guy. I was a great student at the best school. So he wants people to remember that, look, you know, he's not the guy you see on TV saying you're fired. He's a guy that has credentials, who understands the market, understands economy, and in some ways, I think he is charismatic.
And he has shown anything he touches, he can make money. Even if the companies go bankrupt, he still personally makes money.
He does, but I think what he does is he brings that pizzazz and that glamour to the Republican Party where it's missing. It's also missing on the Democratic side of the House beyond President Obama. But on the Republican side, let's think about it. I mean, you've got a whole bunch of very interesting characters who might run. You've got Mike Huckabee. You've got Michelle Bachmann. You've got Mitt Romney, Newt Gingrich. None of these are enticing choices. They all come with like a warning or caution label underneath them, right?
He's the one who takes all the oxygen out of the room. I mean, he's a born promoter. Everybody listens to him, you know.
And he's compelling.
And he's compelling, and of course, he's a shrewd businessman. So he says, if I had to go to Libya, why would I want to go to Libya? Unless I can own all the oil up there. Yeah, I'll spend some money, then I'll own the oil.
He's very practical in that way, and he's been labeled.
It's not possible, but anyways, at least it's good to hear that this guy is going to protect America from all these leeches that come on us. You know.
One thing I do like about him, he has been called a working class hero, and in some ways, his views of complex topics are maybe overly simple. He sees the world as black and white. And I really like that because so much of the political landscape is gray, right? Everything has nuances, subtleties, and layers that you want someone just to have the gusto, the strength to stand up and just say, this is what I think. And laugh at me if you want, call me crazy if you want, but this is what I think. In some ways, I wish President Obama would have done more of that. And instead, you've got Donald Trump now, who is again going to steal the thunder away from this election cycle just because of who he is.
I hope he does. You know, I hope he jumps in the arena. But at the same time, you know, we here in Washington, D.C., of course, it's a privilege. Our economy in Washington, D.C. is pretty good. One of the things that keeps us moving is this Congress and the senators. The congressmen and the senators, they need money to run every 2 years and every 6 years on these elections. And it takes a lot of money. So how do they make it? Folks, what they do is they create a lot of upheaval in almost every industry. In this week it's banking, next week steel, next week it's environment, next week. So all the industry that work in that particular thing, they'll come out with the money and have them come in, talk to them and others.
Get the attention away from their industry.
Yeah. And consequently, what we have is a very big government. We need to have a smaller government. Yes, politics is business, but this is really taking it out a little too far.
Moving on, folks, I'm sure many of you saw the article that appeared in the Washington Post over the weekend called What's Holding India Back from Real Growth? This was an article that Stephen Pearlstein wrote, and I thought it was a really good analysis of India's positives and negatives. You know, we've heard things like India's growth rate is great. It's like at 8.6%, which if you look at our economy here in the U.S., you think, wow, all the action is happening in India. And it is. India and China. China's growth rate is even better than India at 10.2%. But this talks about the fact that India's growth, while it's substantial, isn't necessarily sustainable.
No, it's sustainable in the fact this is the low-hanging fruit. 89% is low-hanging fruit. But they can do something so much more and better, and that's what I thought the story said, if they had the structural and...
Well, a couple of interesting points that the article makes. One I'll share with you, which I thought was a brilliant observation. You know, India has become the outsourced center of the world, right? We do a lot of service-related industries, starting from call centers, even doing things like medical tourism now, but they're all service-related industries. And yet we also have seen articles emerge recently about the fact that India produces a lot of young graduates, but not many of them are employable.
That's right.
Right? So now you have this dichotomy between a very young population in India, entrepreneurial in its nature, and yet not many are really truly qualified for a job structure. And yet you have an economy that's heavily skewed towards service-oriented industries. Well, he talks about how India needs to change in certain ways to keep this growth sustained. It talks about how manufacturing really needs to come up and rise in India. One of the companies he highlights in this article is Bajaj Auto, which